Okay, let's get started. So we've got 1/3 left, right? Sure. You guys aren't excited because you wanted to just keep going? So I think we only have 3 more organ systems to talk about. There's the urinary system, or renal system, digestive, and reproductive. Is that right? All right, so kind of on the home stretch. The renal system, I think, is the more complex one of these 3. We're going to spend a number of lectures going over this system, and some parts in particular kind of get more detail than others. Digestive system, I think, is going to be pretty straightforward. It's a long tube. You can see what happens with food as it goes all the way through. Reproductive system, everybody likes talking about that for whatever reason, so that won't be hard. So it's our last big push. All right, so the urinary system is what we're going to talk about now. Again, I just sort of hinted at urinary and renal systems are the same systems. Right? The names sort of emphasize different aspects of the system. For instance, the urinary system emphasizes what the system makes, and that's urine. Renal, the name renal refers to or emphasizes the main organ that makes the urine. So renal refers to kidney. But those are the exact same systems, renal system versus urinary system. All right, so before we get into how this thing works, let's talk about the general function of our kidneys. So we'll see the kidneys are really where all the action happens. All the rest of this system is really just to move the urine around or move blood around within it. So if we were to sort of say in general, sort of wrap it up into one phrase, what the urinary system does or what kidneys do, it filters our blood. So we've got a very healthy blood supply that goes to our kidneys, and our kidneys are going to take a subset out of that, sort of work through it to see what we want to keep and what we want to get rid of. Right? So our kidneys filter our blood. More specifically, what are our kidneys doing for us? Well, for one, they can help regulate the extracellular fluid volume. Right? So the amount of fluid in our bodies. And that's, I think, pretty easy to imagine. If your kidneys produce more urine, right, where did that urine come from? It's our blood, right? Because we filter our blood to make the urine. If you make more urine, that means you took more volume out of your blood. If you take more volume out of your blood, then you have less extracellular fluid volume. If you produce less urine, then you're going to hold on to more volume. Right? So that's pretty straightforward. Kidneys are also important with ion balance. And as we get into this, we'll see that these two are really closely connected. The amount of the volume, the fluid, the amount of water you have in your bodies, and the ions you have. So if you have too many ions in your body, your kidneys can help you get rid of extra ions. If you don't have enough of something, then they can hold on to more so you don't lose as much. So it's going to help with ion balance.
Thank you.
And if you tie these two together, really what your kidneys are doing is helping with osmolarity regulation. I'm trying to smush those 2 words together. It didn't work. Right? So regulating your osmolarity, how concentrated your body is. So yeah, you need a certain amount of fluid. You need a certain amount of ions. But almost what's more important is the ratio of those two. Right? How concentrated you are. Almost everything we've talked about this whole semester in this class relies on really sensitive concentrations. Right? You change concentrations by just a little bit and you get a big reaction, a big change. Think about your neurons. Right? You let a little bit of sodium come in and you get a big depolarization. You can send a message to some muscle or gland that does something dramatic. Right? So keeping just the right concentration in your body, or osmolarity, is really important. Your kidneys play a major role in that. The next one, pH regulation. How acidic or basic you are. Right? The kidneys are really important in that. Right? So they can get rid of extra acid, they can hold on to acid depending on what you need. We're also going to see as we go through the renal system that it sort of highlights how all of our systems are really dependent on each other. So pH regulation, for instance, we look at that in a little bit more detail. We'll see it's not just the renal system, but the respiratory system plays a really important role in that as well. All right, and then another one, waste excretion. This is our excretory system. Right? A lot of times people think, oh, our waste system must be the digestive system. Right? Because every time you have in the morning a cup of coffee and a bran muffin, you got to go to the bathroom, and out comes a bunch of stuff you really didn't want in the first place. Right? But we'll see when we get the digestive system that most of that material was never in your body in the first place. Which at first sounds kind of weird, but hopefully that makes sense later on. So the main way that we get rid of metabolic waste is through our urinary system or renal system. Okay? Alright. Let's take a sort of quick survey of the anatomy of the urinary system, so then we can go ahead and look at how the whole thing works. So again, the main players here are our kidneys. We have a pair of kidneys. They're embedded in that posterior wall of our abdominal pelvic cavity, kind of tucked in under our floating ribs. Each of those kidneys has its own ureter. So we have a pair of ureters. I should have written that in the plural form. It should be an S in the end, because we have two ureters. So your kidneys are going to filter blood, produce urine. That urine leaves the kidneys through their ureters. So you've got two kidneys and then these hoses, essentially, or tubes that lead down from the kidneys. And the two ureters converge on a single urinary bladder. A single urinary bladder. It's not just the bladder, because you've got other bladders, like a gallbladder. Alright, so a single urinary bladder, which is really just a temporary holding place for urine. So you come up with a convenient spot to get rid of your urine, like the toilet. And that urinary bladder is drained by a single urethra. So urine leaves the bladder through the urethra and then ends up in the toilet. Or that specimen cup that I made you pee in all that long. Okay? Alright, look at the drawing. So here we have the two kidneys. Each kidney has its own ureter, so these dark brown tubes here represent those ureters, draining urine out of the kidneys into a single urinary bladder, a temporary storage area, and then that bladder is drained through the urethra. Alright, so now I want to do is go ahead and focus on the kidneys themselves. Alright, so we're going to take a look at those kidneys, look inside to see what's in there, and then we'll figure out how that thing works. Alright, let's first think about the regions of the kidney. Regions of the kidney. I'm going to go ahead and draw up here a sort of simplified kidney. So this little tube here represents the ureter that's draining the kidney. Here we've got our kidney. I sliced it open so we can see inside. And we're going to divide it up into regions. So we're going to have three regions here. This outer one, the middle one, and the inner one. We'll come up with names for those. The outermost region would be the cortex. So that's the cortex. Goes all around the outer portion of the kidney. Deep to that cortex is a medulla. And the innermost portion is the pelvis. Okay. All right, we could look at a much better drawing. Over here, we've got our kidney cut open. Here's our ureter. This outer, lighter colored part looks like there are little lines in it. That represents the cortex. The inner part it looks like little paintbrushes. That all represents the medulla. And then this open space inside here is where the pelvis is. Right? This thin line here represents the thickness of that sort of shell. It's on the outside of that kidney. So this is just the outer area of the kidney. All right. I'm pointing out these layers because as we get into how this works, we're going to be talking about these different regions, and it'll be really important to sort of keep that straight. All right, within the kidney, it's loaded up with these functional units. Kidney's functional unit. We've talked about other organs that have functional units. I don't know if I used that phrase functional unit before, but think about, say, skeletal muscle. What is the functional unit of a skeletal muscle? That's right, sarcomere. You guys remember all that stuff, right? You should have cumulative exams, and then you can show off all your knowledge. You guys don't like my jokes at all. I don't say any more, but you probably never did. All right, so when you understood how a sarcomere worked, right, how those filaments or those proteins are going to be pulling on each other, pressing the sarcomeres, forcibly shortening, then you can extrapolate that out to the entire muscle organ to get a good sense of how that whole organ works. How does it contract? We're going to do the same with the kidneys. The kidneys are made up of these tiny little structures, these functional units. If we understand how one of these little functional units can take a little bit of blood and filter it out and sort through the contents to come up with urine, then we can extrapolate that out to understand how the whole kidney works. All right, so what is the functional unit of a kidney? It's the nephron. Nephron. So the nephron is where the blood gets filtered and where urine gets produced. Okay? So when we go back and look inside our kidney, right, we've got this open space here. That'll get filled with urine that trickles down into the ureter. But all the rest of this out here is really just made up of nephrons. There's a nephron drawn in yellow up there, sort of exaggerate how big it is. But there are lots and lots of nephrons that make up the cortex and medulla of our kidneys. About 1 million nephrons for each kidney. So there are lots and lots of nephrons stuffed inside our kidneys. And if we go ahead and let's blow up, say, this part right here and look at it more closely. So we'll get a little cortex, a little bit of medulla. That's what we see in this drawing. Right, here's that lighter portion on the outside, the cortex. The darker portion inside is part of the medulla. And all these yellow tubes with blood vessels represent those nephrons. So there are lots and lots of nephrons in there, all filtering blood, making urine. And you can even see now how they drain into that space that makes up the renal pelvis. So now what I want to do is I want to go through a nephron and sort of pick apart its individual parts, identify those parts, and then we can start talking about what they do and how it works. All right, so for each individual nephron, we can talk about two different portions of it. There's the vascular portion, the blood vessel part, and the tubular part. There's this tube that sort of runs through that makes up most of the nephron, and it interacts with the blood vessels. So I'm going to just draw a real simplified nephron up here, and then we can go ahead and label it just so we have it. The thing is, if I draw right here, you can't see it because I'm in the way all the time. Is that right? That's fine. I don't need to see it. Maybe if I move back and forth enough, you can see it, right? All right, let's try. So let's see. All right, so this actually represents the tubule portion. We're going to label its parts in a little bit. We're going to start with the vascular elements. So I'll draw those vascular elements in as we go. All right, we can start with the renal artery. So this is the artery that comes off your ascending aorta. It goes into the kidneys. This is what brings blood to each kidney. So each kidney is going to have its own renal artery. So that actually would be bringing blood to the organ itself. If we look at this drawing, here we've got our kidney that's been cut open. This main artery carrying blood in is the renal artery. All right, notice that this renal artery is colored red. And why is it colored red? It's well oxygenated, and so that suggests that it's part of the systemic circulation, which it is. that renal artery carries blood into the kidney, and then the kidney has a number of other arteries that sort of branch out going through the pelvis, through the medulla, through the cortex. We're not going to go over all those blood vessel names. If you've already taken anatomy, you know those names. If you haven't taken it yet, you will know those names. But for now, we're just going to skip right to the smaller vessels, like the arterioles. So once we've gone from the renal artery through all those other arteries, you get to the afferent arteriole. So the afferent arteriole. So that's this blood vessel here carrying blood into the beginning of the tubule portion of the nephron. The afferent arteriole flows into capillaries. And these capillaries we're going to call the glomerulus. And the glomerulus is actually a ball of capillaries. So imagine you've got your capillary bed, and you sort of fold it up and stuff it into a little ball and push it into this capsule here. Right? So that's a capillary bed, and we're going to call it the glomerulus. Oh, shoot. I got too excited. Glomerulus. So that's the glomerulus in there. A ball of capillaries. So we're going to get some exchange there, right? That's where exchange occurs in capillary beds. We look at this drawing from a book, and we can see some arteries in here going into our afferent arteriole that carries blood into this ball of capillaries, the glomerulus, at the beginning of the tubule portion. All right, from the glomerulus, blood then flows out to the efferent arteriole. Which is kind of weird. Why is that weird? Because it's not weird. You guys don't see anything weird about that? Because it's what? Two places? Well, I only have one capillary bed drawn in here so far. But you're on the right track.
They're both red, so they're both oxygen.
They're both red? Red alert. All right. So, yeah, it suggests that we didn't really lose a lot of oxygen here. Okay? But it could just be I don't have a blue pen. Right? But you're also kind of on the right track.
Is it because it's taking it out, or should be taking it out, so you would think it would be a vein?
Exactly. So traditionally you would think, or how we've talked about it, blood leaves the heart going through arteries and arterioles. It comes back to the heart through venules and veins, and the transition between the two is marked by capillaries. Well, we went through a capillary bed, but now we're still in arteries or arterioles. We didn't go into a venule or a vein. That's weird. Does everyone see how that's weird now? Right? There are only a few places in the body where you actually go through two capillary beds before you start coming back to the heart. This is one of them. You guys know where the other places are? Liver, right? So between your gut and your liver. Where's the other one? What's that? The pancreas? Not your pancreas. No? I'm just going to start listing things. Huh? My left big toe, my right big toe. So it's between your hypothalamus and your pituitary. Super close. Your right body. You're in the right body. Alright. So, but this is kind of weird because, again, we're going to have two capillary beds before we start going back to the heart. All right, so after you go through the efferent arterioles, you end up going through that second capillary bed.
Those are regular capillaries?
These are actually fenestrated capillaries as opposed to continuous capillaries. Did we talk about those before?
Yes.
We did, yeah. So these are extra leaky capillaries. All right. So that's the second capillary bed. And those capillaries surround the rest of the nephron. That's what the red squiggles are supposed to represent. Okay? So we go into the nephron with the efferent arteriole, go through the first capillary bed, the glomerulus, out the efferent arteriole, and then you enter into the second capillary bed that surrounds the rest of the nephron. So we've got two sites for exchange, right? Remember, capillaries are where you get exchange. At the glomerulus and that second capillary bed. Once you go through the second capillary bed, then you can go through venules. Now I want a blue pen. I don't have it. There's a venule that comes off here. Right, it goes into veins now, going back to the heart.
Where are you pointing from the bottom?
At the end here. So you've got all these capillaries wrapped around the rest of the nephron, and they'll converge into veins, right? Venules and veins that end up going to the renal vein, going back to the heart, inferior vena cava, right atrium. All right, you guys got that down? No complaints? All right, so here's the drawing again. So we've got our afferent arteriole carrying blood into the nephron, goes to the glomerulus, the first capillary bed. Then blood flows out to the efferent arteriole, going into the peritubular capillaries. Those are all colored in purple here, right? As it surrounds the rest of the nephron, and those all converge together to go out veins that lead to the renal vein, going back to the heart, draining the kidney of blood. This picture here shows those veins collecting together at the renal vein, goes back to the heart. Okay. How do you guys feel about the vascular part? Yeah.
Are the second capillary beds called the peritubular capillaries?
So peritubular capillaries are the second capillary bed. Right. You may also see the term vasa recta. That's part of the peritubular capillaries. Right. And peritubular really literally means around the tubule. Okay, anything else for now?
You said the fenestrated were the glomerulus?
So these are fenestrated capillaries, and you know, I'm not sure if the peritubular capillaries are fenestrated or not. What's that?
Continuous.
Those are continuous? Probably continuous. Okay. Anything else? All right. So now let's go ahead and look at the tubular elements. So we've talked about all the blood vessels. Let's go back and look at what's drawn here as green, the tubule portion. So the tubule portion, this is a tube, and it's got its upstreammost end where this little C-shaped structure is, and it's hollow, so we're going to see fluid enters into it from the blood vessels, and as it flows through, we're going to modify its contents, and then what comes out at the end is going to be urine. So this goes to ureter. It's really hard to draw. All right, so that drains out to the ureter, goes through the renal pelvis. All right, the upstream-most end of the tubule, the very beginning of it, is Bowman's capsule. So Bowman's capsule surrounds or encapsulates the glomerulus. You might also see it as the glomerular capsule. Same thing. that capsule, Bowman's capsule, plus the glomerulus, thinking about those two structures together, is what we call the renal corpuscle. It's more vocabulary for you to remember. And so the renal corpuscle is made up of both Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus. So that ball of capillaries is surrounded by the very beginning of the tubule. Okay. All right, so in this drawing, you can see an afferent arteriole, efferent arteriole. Between the two is the glomerulus. That glomerulus is surrounded by Bowman's capsule. That's where fluid from the blood vessels first enter into the tubule. First comes in at Bowman's capsule. That's the upstreammost end. All right, once fluid flows through Bowman's capsule, it then enters into the proximal tubule, also called the proximal convoluted tubule. I'm going to abbreviate that as PCT. Right? Proximal because it's closest to the beginning compared to the rest of the tubule. Convoluted because, unlike how I drew it here, it's convoluted. It's wiggly. It goes all over the place. And tubule because it's part of the tubule. From the proximal convoluted tubule, we enter into the loop of Henle. So the loop of Henle is this part that dips down and then comes right back up. Within the loop of Henle, we have a descending limb and then we have an ascending limb. Descending is where it goes down, ascending is where it comes back up. Right? Seems kind of strange why you have this weird little random loop here. When we get into the function of it all, it'll make more sense. Yeah?
What's
PCT is proximal convoluted tubule. Anything else for now? All right, once we go through the loop of Henle, we then enter into the distal tubule, or distal convoluted tubule. Distal convoluted tubule. Distal because it's further away from Bowman's capsule than the proximal convoluted tubule. And it's also convoluted. It wiggles back and forth. It's not straight. Okay. Go back to our little drawing here. So we've got Bowman's capsule at the beginning surrounding the glomerulus. It flows into the proximal convoluted tubule. That runs into the loop of Henle, the descending limb followed by the ascending limb, which flows into the distal convoluted tubule. All right. A feature involving the distal convoluted tubule is this one's great, juxtaglomerular apparatus. Only I could make up terms that cool. Juxtaglomerular apparatus. So what this is where the distal convoluted tubule comes up, or starts. It actually starts right between the two arterioles. So the distal convoluted tubule starts right there. So the way I drew this nephron is not correct. There's a lot of things about it that aren't correct because it's so simplified. But instead of the loop of Henle sort of turning away from the glomerulus, it actually turns back on itself. If I drew it that way, it'd be even more complicated and even more messy. So that's why I drew it the way I did. But it would come back up so that the distal convoluted tubule would start right between these two arterioles. And we'll see later on, there's actually communication that goes on between the distal convoluted tubule and those arterioles. There's some feedback going on in there. And those two together, the distal convoluted tubule with those arterioles, forms the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Okay. See a drawing of that. So here we can see it folding sort of back on itself, and that distal convoluted tubule is wedged between those two arterioles. If we go ahead and look at that up close, we can see here the distal convoluted tubule has been cut open, so you can see the lumen inside. But you can see its cells are right up there against the walls of those arterioles. Here's the afferent arteriole leading into this glomerulus, and the efferent arteriole draining out that glomerulus. And so these together form the juxtaglomerular apparatus. This is another view of the same thing. We can see the distal convoluted tubule coming right up at us between those two arterioles. The afferent arteriole coming into the glomerulus, leading out to the efferent arteriole. And you can also visualize here Bowman's capsule surrounding that glomerulus, leading off to the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay. All right, from the distal tubule, fluid flows into the collecting duct. Right, so the distal convoluted tubule flows into the collecting duct that runs down through the renal pelvis, eventually to the urinary bladder, urethra. All right, go through the distal convoluted tubule, meets up with the collecting duct running down to the renal pelvis. Notice these other little branches here. So multiple nephrons will share the same collecting duct. So they don't all have their own collecting duct. Sort of backing up to see a slightly bigger picture. We've got all these nephrons lined up here. So these balls represent the Bowman's capsule. Inside there would be the glomerulus. Leads to the proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule. You can see it's right up against those arterioles. That flows into a collecting duct that runs down to the renal pelvis and out the kidney. So all those collecting ducts run through these dark regions here, flowing into the pelvis, flows out through the ureter. Questions about any of these parts or their relationships? Make sense? Yes.
I'm not really understanding the juxtaglomerular
Apparatus?
Like, what exactly is it? You said it contained both the distal tubule and